Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed his failing ranch with tired eyes. The drought had lasted 3 years now. His cattle were down to 12 head, and the bank had sent another notice last week. At 45, he'd spent 20 years building this place from nothing, and now he was watching it crumble. He had maybe 2 months before he'd lose everything. The thought kept him awake most nights, but he still got up every morning and worked because that's what you did. You kept going until you couldn't anymore. He was riding his fence line that scorching afternoon when he saw them, 2 figures stumbling across the barren landscape. As he got closer, his heart sank. They were Apache women, and they were in bad shape. But what struck him most was their size. Both women were unusually tall and powerfully built, probably close to 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of incredible strength. Despite their condition, they carried themselves with a dignity that demanded respect. The older one collapsed first, then the younger, both falling to their knees in the red dust. Thomas knew the risks. The Apache wars weren't officially over, and helping native people could bring trouble from both sides. He had so little left already. The smart thing would be to ride away, to pretend he'd never seen them. But Thomas had never been good at the smart thing when it conflicted with the right thing. He dismounted and approached carefully, hands visible. The older woman looked up at him with fierce eyes, clearly expecting violence or rejection. Instead, Thomas offered his canteen. They drank like they hadn't seen water in days, which they probably hadn't. Thomas helped them onto his horse and walked them back to his ranch, feeling their weight and understanding these were not ordinary women. They were warriors, or had been. Their arms bore scars and their hands were calloused from hard work and harder fighting. At his cabin, he gave them what little food he had, jerky and stale bread, and they ate with the focused intensity of the truly starving. He didn't ask questions and they didn't offer explanations. When night fell, he gave them his own bed and slept on the floor by the dying fire. The next morning, Thomas woke to the sound of horses. His stomach dropped. Through his window, he saw them, at least 50 Apache warriors surrounding his property, and at their head rode a chief whose presence commanded immediate attention. Thomas's hands shook as he reached for his rifle, not to fight but just to hold something familiar in what might be his final moments. The 2 women emerged from his cabin, and he noticed for the first time they'd cleaned up and looked remarkably regal despite their ordeal. The chief dismounted and walked directly to Thomas. He was an older man, perhaps 60, with a face carved by wind and war. When he spoke, his English was clear and deliberate. "These are my daughters. They were scouting when soldiers ambushed them. They escaped but lost everything: horses, weapons, supplies. They walked 3 days through desert to survive." He paused, his eyes boring into Thomas. "You could have ignored them. You could have turned them away. You could have sold them to the soldiers for bounty money. Instead, you gave them your last food in your own bed." Thomas found his voice. "They were dying. I couldn't just let them die." The chief studied him for a long moment, then looked around at Thomas's struggling ranch, the broken fences, the thin cattle, the cabin that needed repairs. Nothing escaped his notice. "You are poor," he stated simply. "Your land is dying. You have little, yet you gave what little you had." He turned and spoke in Apache to his warriors. They immediately dismounted and began unloading pack horses Thomas hadn't noticed before. "My daughters tell me you did not ask for their names. You did not ask for payment. You did not touch them with disrespect. You simply helped because it was right." The chief's voice grew heavy with emotion. "I am tired of war. I am tired of watching my people die, and I have made a decision that will shock both our peoples." Thomas watched in confusion as the warriors began unloading supplies, food, tools, seed, and resources that represented more wealth than Thomas had seen in years. But the chief wasn't done. He called his daughters forward and they stood beside him. These 2 powerful women who'd been helpless yesterday, and now stood like the warriors they clearly were. "My daughters have no husbands. The war has killed most of our young men. They face a future of loneliness or being traded to men they do not choose." He placed a hand on each daughter's shoulder. "I offer you a choice, Thomas. Not as payment, but as alliance. Marry my daughters. Unite our families. Let them help you save this ranch and let us prove that peace between our peoples is possible." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't what he'd expected. Marriage to both of them. The older daughter, whose name he learned was Nasha, stepped forward. She spoke in halting English. "We are not weak women who need protection. We are warriors. We can work. We can fight. We can help you save your land. Our Father offers this because he sees in you what we saw, a good man in a world of bad men. But the choice is yours. We will not be forced on any man. The younger daughter, Kaya, added her own words. We know this is strange to white people, but in our culture, strong women are valued, not hidden. If you accept, you gain not just wives, but partners, workers, protectors. Your ranch will thrive. You will never face hardship alone again. Thomas looked at these two remarkable women, at the chief whose eyes held both hope and resignation, at the 50 warriors waiting to see if peace was possible. He thought about his failing ranch, his loneliness, the empty cabin that echoed with the ghost of dreams that had died. He thought about how easily he could have ridden past them yesterday, how his life had been heading toward failure and solitude. And he thought about what the chief had said, that he'd given what little he had because it was right. I accept, Thomas said quietly, and then louder. I accept. The words felt like stepping off a cliff, but also like finally finding solid ground. The chief's face broke into the first smile Thomas had seen, and the warriors erupted in celebration. Nasha and Kaya approached him, and for the first time they smiled too. These fierce women who'd survived ambush and desert to find an unexpected ally. The wedding ceremony happened that very day, a blend of Apache traditions and Thomas's own simple Christian prayer. As the sun set over his ranch, Thomas stood with his two new wives, surrounded by Apache warriors who were now his family, and watched as they began the work of saving his land. Nasha proved to be an expert with horses. Kaya knew water management techniques that would help fight the drought, and together, the three of them formed a partnership unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Within months, Thomas's ranch was thriving. Within a year, other settlers and Apache began tentatively trading using Thomas's ranch as neutral ground. And within 2 years, Thomas understood that saving 2 starving women hadn't just saved his ranch. It had saved his soul and proved that sometimes the most shocking decisions are the ones that make the most sense.